Hey, tonight we're diving into something that'll make you grateful for modern law enforcement, the absolutely brutal reality of being a sheriff in the Wild West. We're talking about dusty streets, corrupt politicians, and a job where your life expectancy was about as reliable as a poker player's promises. So grab your hat, because we're heading back to when justice came with a side of lead poisoning. Hey, if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps more than you know. I'm always curious where you all are listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Love seeing our little global community connect through these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1875 and you're about to discover why being a Wild West sheriff was one of the worst jobs in human history. The first thing that hits you isn't the morning light streaming through your grimy window, it's the smell. Sweet Lord, the smell. Your nostrils fill with a cocktail of horse manure, unwashed bodies, and something that might be rotting meat from the butcher shop down the street. The air is thick enough to chew, heavy with dust that's been kicked up by countless boots and hooves on the dirt roads that pass for streets in this godforsaken frontier town you now call home. You're lying on what passes for a bed, a wooden frame with rope stringing holding up a mattress stuffed with straw that crackles like autumn leaves every time you breathe. The straw pokes through the thin fabric, jabbing into your back like tiny needles, reminding you that comfort is a luxury reserved for folks back east. Your blanket, if you can call it that, is a rough wool thing that feels like it was woven from sheep that died of spite. It scratches against your skin, but it's the only thing standing between you and the bone-deep chill that creeps through the gaps in the wooden walls. The good news? You're the newly elected sheriff of Dusty Creek, Kansas. Population maybe 300 on a good day when the cattle drivers aren't all dead drunk in the jail cells. The bad news? Well, where do we even start with the bad news? Your predecessor left town in the middle of the night with half the county's tax money, and the other half got spent on what the previous sheriff called essential law enforcement supplies, which turned out to be a month-long poker game and enough whiskey to drown a horse. You swing your legs over the side of your rope bed and immediately regret it. The floorboards are so cold they might as well be made of ice, and they creak like a ship in a storm under your weight. Every step sends a groan echoing through your small room above Murphy's General Store. The only quarters you could afford on a sheriff's salary. And speaking of salary, let's just say you're not in this for the money. Your base pay is $200 a year, though you might earn up to $4,000 if you're really good at collecting fees for serving papers and arresting folks. The catch? You've got to share those fees with any deputies you hire, assuming you can find anyone desperate enough to pin on a badge in this lawless place. The morning ritual begins with you fumbling around in the pre-dawn darkness for your clothes. No electric lights out here, just a kerosene lamp that smokes like a locomotive and gives off about as much light as a firefly with cataracts. Your sheriff's outfit isn't exactly what you'd call impressive. It's a brown wool suit that's seen better decades, with pants that are too short and a jacket that's too tight. The fabric feels like sandpaper against your skin, especially where the sweat stains have made it permanently stiff. Your hat, well, it's more of a suggestion of a hat. The brim droops like a sad dog's ears, and the crown has a dent from where you dropped it yesterday while chasing old Pete's escaped pig down Main Street. But the real symbol of your authority hangs heavy on your hip, a Colt 45 that weighs about as much as a newborn calf. The leather holster creaks every time you move, and the gun itself feels like it could pull your whole body sideways if you're not careful. You've practiced drawing it maybe a dozen times, and you're about as accurate as a drunk throwing darts in a windstorm. But hey, in this job, intimidation counts for more than marksmanship. At least that's what you keep telling yourself. Your first task of the day? Well, it's not exactly what you'd call glamorous. You need to make your rounds, and that starts with a walk down Main Street to collect any trash that's accumulated overnight. Yes, you read that right. The county sheriff doubling as a street sweeper. Last night was apparently eventful, judging by the collection of broken bottles, cigar butts, and what appears to be someone's lost boot scattered across the dirt road. The bottle pieces crunch under your feet like bones, and you make a mental note to warn folks about walking barefoot. The town is just starting to wake up as you begin your clean-up duties. Smoke curls up from chimneys like lazy grey ribbons, and the first sounds of the day drift out from behind closed doors. Someone coughing up what sounds like half their lungs, a baby crying, and the rhythmic thunk-thunk-thunk of someone chopping wood. Your breath creates little puffs of steam in the cold morning air, and your fingers are already going numb despite the worn leather gloves you're wearing. Murphy's General Store sits right below your room, and old Murphy himself emerges just as you're sweeping past his front door. He's a grizzled man with a beard that looks like it could hide small animals, and he smells perpetually of coffee grounds and leather oil. "Morning, Sheriff," he says, and you can hear the mixture of respect and pity in his voice. Everyone in town knows this job is basically a death sentence with a badge attached. "Morning, Murphy," you reply, your voice hoarse from the dry air. "Any trouble last night?" Murphy spits into the dirt, a brown stream that immediately disappears into the dust. Nothing you need to worry about, just the usual crowd at Salty Sue's getting a little too friendly with the working girls. Salty Sue's is the town's combination saloon and brothel. A ramshackle building that leans to one side like it's perpetually drunk. It's painted a faded red that's now more pink than anything else, and the piano inside sounds like it's being played by someone wearing boxing gloves. You nod and continue your sweep, gathering up the debris from last night's festivities. It's not just trash, it's evidence of how your community spends its evenings. Broken whiskey bottles tell stories of fights that probably started over cards or women or just general orneriness. Cigar butts indicate the presence of men with at least a little money to spend. And that lost boot, well, somebody's walking home with one bare foot this morning, and that's a story you'll probably hear about later. The sun is starting to peek over the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would be beautiful if you weren't so focused on survival. The light reveals just how rough this place really is. The buildings along Main Street look like they were thrown together by someone who'd never seen a proper structure before. They lean on each other for support, held together by hope, nails, and the occasional prayer. Paint is a luxury here. Most of the wood has weathered to a grey colour that matches the perpetual dust coating everything. Your next stop is the jail, which is optimistically called the County Detention Facility, but is really just a wooden box with iron bars on the windows. It's about the size of a decent chicken coop, and it smells worse. The jail sits at the end of Main Street, like a period, at the end of a particularly depressing sentence. As you approach, you can hear snoring from inside. Apparently, you've got at least one guest sleeping off last night's poor decisions. The key to the jail hangs on a ring attached to your belt, and it's almost as heavy as your gun. The lock sticks, it always sticks, and you have to jiggle the key while putting your shoulder against the door. When it finally gives way, the smell hits you like a physical blow. Unwashed bodies, stale alcohol, and the unmistakable aroma of someone who didn't quite make it to the chamber pot in time. Inside, you find Jake Morrison, a local ranch hand who apparently thought it would be a good idea to start a fight with a man twice his size over a poker hand. Jake is curled up on the single wooden bench that serves as a bed, using his hat as a pillow. He's a young fellow, maybe 25, with sandy hair and a face that suggests he's made poor decisions before. His clothes are rumpled and stained, and there's dried blood on his knuckles from last night's altercation. "Jake," you say, not unkindly. "Time to wake up." He groans and opens one bloodshot eye. "Sheriff? Oh hell, what time is it? Time for you to pay your fine and get on with your life," you reply. The fine for disturbing the peace is $2, more money than Jake probably has, but less than the cost of feeding him for a week. "You got $2, or do I need to send word to your boss?" Jake sits up slowly, holding his head like it might fall off if he moves too quickly. "I got it, Sheriff. Just give me a minute for the world to stop spinning." This is the glamorous life of a Wild West sheriff, collecting fines from hungover ranch hands and sweeping up broken glass. But you're about to learn that the boring parts of the job are actually the good parts, because in a few hours you're going to face the kind of situation that explains why most sheriffs don't last very long in this position. While Jake fumbles for his money, you take a moment to check your other equipment. Besides the Colt on your hip, you've got a wooden baton that's seen better days, a pair of iron handcuffs that probably weigh more than a horseshoe, and a sheriff's badge that's more dented than shiny. The badge is supposed to be your symbol of authority, but out here, authority is more about how fast you can draw than how bright your badge gleams. The badge itself tells a story. It belonged to your predecessor, Sheriff Tom Bradley, who left town under circumstances that nobody likes to talk about. The dent in the upper right corner came from a bullet that grazed it during what the local newspaper politely called a disagreement with local citizens. The fact that Bradley lived to hand over the badge makes him luckier than most sheriffs in these parts. Jake finally produces 2 crumpled dollar bills from his pocket, along with enough lint to stuff a pillow. You take the money and unlock his cell, and he stumbles out into the morning light like a mole emerging from its hole. "Try to keep the fighting to daylight hours, Jake," you tell him. "I need my sleep." He tips his hat, well, tries to tip his hat, but nearly loses his balance in the process and shuffles off toward the stable where his horse is probably wondering where the hell he's been. You watch him go, already knowing you'll probably see him again next weekend. Jake's got a talent for bad decisions and a liver that can handle more alcohol than a small distillery. With your morning rounds complete, you head back to your office, which is really just a desk and chair squeezed into a corner of Murphy's store. Murphy lets you use the space in exchange for keeping an eye on his merchandise when he's not around, an arrangement that benefits you both since you need the free space, and he needs someone to watch for shoplifters and troublemakers. Your desk is a scarred wooden thing that's seen decades of use. Previous sheriffs have carved their initials into it, along with what appear to be tally marks, possibly counting days survived on the job. The current record, according to the marks, is held by someone with the initials RJ, who apparently lasted 4 months and 3 days. The shortest tenure belongs to WK, who managed exactly 6 days before circumstances forced him to seek employment elsewhere, or possibly a cemetery plot. On top of the desk sits your paperwork, and there's more of it than you expected. Turns out being a sheriff involves a surprising amount of writing. You've got warrants to serve, taxes to collect, and reports to file with the county government. The county expects regular updates on criminal activity, jail occupancy, and fee collection. They also want detailed records of any firearms confiscated, property seized, and fines levied. All of this has to be written by hand, and your handwriting looks like a spider fell into an inkwell and died a slow death across the paper. The tax collection part of your job is particularly challenging. You're responsible for collecting property taxes from every landowner in the county, and many of them view this as an unreasonable government intrusion. Some pay without complaint, others require persuasion, and a few require you to bring along backup, preferably the kind of backup that comes armed and ready for trouble. Today's tax collection route includes a visit to the widow Thompson, who owns a small farm outside town. Mrs. Thompson is a formidable woman who lost her husband to consumption last winter and has been running the farm herself ever since. She's been dodging tax payments for 3 months, claiming she doesn't have the money. The problem is, you've seen her at the general store buying supplies that suggest her financial situation might not be as dire as she claims. Before you head out to the Thompson place, you need to stop by Salty Sue's to check on last night's disturbance. The saloon is technically closed this early in the morning, but there's smoke coming from the chimney, which means Sue is probably already up and cleaning up from last night's business. Sue runs the only entertainment establishment for 50 miles in any direction, which gives her considerable influence in town politics. She's also the only person who knows where all the bodies are buried. Sometimes, literally. The walk to Salty Sue's takes you past the blacksmith shop, where the fires are already burning and the sound of hammer on anvil rings out across the morning air. The blacksmith, a massive man named Big Jim, waves at you from inside his shop. Jim is one of your unofficial deputies. He doesn't wear a badge, but when trouble breaks out, he's usually willing to grab a hammer and help restore order. His arms are like tree trunks, and his hands could probably crush walnuts without breaking a sweat. Salty Sue's establishment sits at the opposite end of town from the jail, which is probably not a coincidence. The building is larger than most in town, with a second floor where the working girls conduct their business. The ground floor serves as a saloon, gambling hall and general gathering place for anyone looking to spend money on liquid courage or temporary companionship. The paint job is fresher than most buildings in town, and there are actual glass windows, real luxuries in a place like Dusty Creek. You push through the batwing doors and immediately step into a different world. The interior of Salty Sue's is dimly lit and smells of tobacco smoke, spilled whiskey, and something that might be perfume but could just as easily be floor cleaner. The floors are sticky with decades of spilled drinks, and the wood has been stained dark by constant traffic and questionable cleaning practices. Sue herself is behind the bar, wiping down glasses with a rag that's seen better days. She's a woman of uncertain age, anywhere from 35 to 55, depending on the light and how much whiskey you've had. Her dress is red and revealing in a way that makes clear her establishment's secondary purpose. She looks up as you enter, and her smile is as sharp as a razor blade. "Morning, Sheriff," she says, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who spent years in smoky rooms. "I was wondering when you'd come around about last night." "Murphy mentioned there was some trouble," you reply, settling onto one of the bar stools. The stool creaks under your weight, and you make a mental note not to lean back too far. "Anything I need to know about?" Sue continues polishing her glass, though it was probably clean 3 wipes ago. "Nothing too serious. Just a couple of cowboys getting too familiar with my girls. Big Jim helped me sort it out." She nods toward the back corner, where you notice for the first time that one of the tables has a leg that's clearly been recently repaired. "Any damages I need to document?" you ask. Part of your job involves keeping track of property damage that might result in civil claims. It's boring work, but it helps prevent larger conflicts down the road. "Just the table leg, and that's already fixed," Sue replies. "The boys involved were from the Circle K ranch. They paid for the damage and apologized to the girls. No need for official action." You make a mental note to check with the Circle K foreman next time you're out that way. Ranchers generally keep their cowboys in line, but it's worth letting them know when their men cause trouble in town. It's also worth staying on good terms with the ranchers. They employ most of the county's working men, and their political support can make or break a sheriff's career. As you prepare to leave Salty Sue's, she calls out to you. "Sheriff, you might want to know, there's been talk about some of the ranchers organising their own law enforcement. Something about not trusting county officials." This stops you cold. Vigilante groups are every sheriff's nightmare. When citizens start taking the law into their own hands, it usually means they've lost faith in official law enforcement, and once vigilantes get organised, they often decide that the sheriff is part of the problem they need to solve. What kind of talk, you ask, trying to keep your voice casual. Sue shrugs, but her eyes are serious. Nothing specific, just grumbling about taxes and federal interference. But you know how these things start. First it's complaints about government, then it's complaints about the people enforcing government rules. You thank Sue for the information and step back out into the morning sun, which is now bright enough to make you squint. The warmth feels good on your face, but Sue's warning has put a chill in your bones that has nothing to do with the weather. Vigilante justice is swift, brutal, and often completely arbitrary, and sheriffs who find themselves on the wrong side of vigilante groups tend to end up decorating tree branches with rope necklaces. The rest of your morning is spent on routine tasks, checking with the telegraph operator to see if any warrants have come in from other counties, stopping by the bank to deposit yesterday's fee collections, and making your presence known on Main Street. The last part is more important than it sounds. Half of being a sheriff is just being visible, letting people know that law enforcement is present and paying attention. As you walk the dusty streets of Dusty Creek, you can't help but think about the men who held this job before you. Some left for better opportunities, others left in wooden boxes, a few simply disappeared one night, never to be seen again. The life expectancy of a Wild West sheriff isn't exactly encouraging. It's a job where retirement planning involves hoping you live long enough to need it. But for now, you're alive, you're employed, and you've made it through another morning without anyone shooting at you. In the world of frontier law enforcement, that counts as a successful start to the day. The real challenges are still ahead. Tax collection, jurisdictional disputes, corrupt officials, and the ever-present threat of violence that hangs over every decision you make. As the sun climbs higher and the town begins to bustle with activity, you steel yourself for whatever the day might bring, because being a sheriff in the Wild West isn't just about keeping the peace, it's about surviving long enough to see another sunset. And in a place where justice comes at the end of a gun barrel and the law is whatever the strongest man says it is, survival is never guaranteed. The afternoon brings your first real test as sheriff, and it arrives in the form of a man wearing a federal marshal's badge who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. Deputy Marshal Robert Weidenman steps off the noon stage with the kind of expression that suggests he's here to make someone's life considerably more complicated, and since you're the only law enforcement officer visible, that someone is probably you. Weidenman is a tall, lean man with a moustache that's been waxed to aggressive points and eyes that scan the street like he's looking for trouble. His badge gleams in the sunlight, obviously better maintained than your own battered piece of tin. His clothes are cleaner than anything you've seen in months. A black wool coat that actually fits properly, pants without visible stains, and boots that look like they've been polished with something other than spit and hope. "You the county sheriff?" he asks, his voice carrying the authority of someone who's used to being the most important person in any room. "That's me," you reply, extending a hand that he examines like it might be carrying some kind of disease before shaking it briefly. "Sheriff Anderson, what brings you to Dusty Creek, Marshal?" Weidenman reaches into his coat and produces a folded document that crackles like dry leaves when he unfolds it. "Federal warrant for the arrest of Samuel Crane, wanted for mail theft. I have reason to believe he's in your jurisdiction." The name hits you like a punch to the gut. Sam Crane runs the livery stable and is one of the few businessmen in town who actually pays his taxes on time. He's also been known to extend credit to folks who can't afford to board their horses, which makes him popular with the working men. The idea that Sam is stealing mail seems about as likely as snow in July, but you keep that opinion to yourself. "You sure you got the right man?" you ask, scanning the warrant. The description is vague enough to fit half the men in the county. Brown hair, average height, sometime moustache. Sam Crane's been running the stable here for near 3 years. Never had any trouble with him. Weideman's smile is as cold as January. That's what makes him a good criminal, Sheriff. Now, are you going to assist me in serving this warrant, or do I need to question your commitment to federal law enforcement? And there it is, the question that every county sheriff dreads. Federal marshals have authority that supersedes local law enforcement, but they're also outsiders who don't understand local politics or relationships. If you help Weideman arrest Sam Crane, you'll lose the support of every businessman in town. If you don't help him, you could find yourself facing federal charges for obstruction of justice. Your stomach churns like you've swallowed a handful of rusty nails. The coffee you had this morning tastes like copper pennies in your mouth, and you can feel sweat starting to gather under your arms despite the cool afternoon air. Your badge feels heavier than usual, pulling at your shirt like it's trying to drag you down into the dirt. "I'll assist you, Marshal," you say finally, because refusing isn't really an option. "But I'd like to see the evidence against Crane before we make the arrest." Weideman folds the warrant and tucks it back inside his coat. The evidence is sufficient for federal prosecutors. That's all you need to know. This is the part of being a sheriff that no one talks about in the dime novels, the politics. You're not just enforcing the law, you're navigating a maze of competing jurisdictions, conflicting loyalties and federal oversight that can make or break your career. Town marshals can be elected or appointed, and they don't always see eye to eye with county sheriffs. Federal marshals answer to Washington, not to local voters, and military officers have their own rules entirely. The walk to Crane's livery stable feels like a death march. Your boots crunch on the gravel and dirt, each step sending small clouds of dust swirling around your ankles. The afternoon sun beats down on your back, making your wool coat feel like you're wearing a blanket made of sandpaper. Sweat trickles down your spine, gathering at the small of your back where your gun belt sits. Main Street is busier now, with afternoon shoppers and workers moving between the various businesses. Mrs. Henderson nods politely as you pass, but you can see the curiosity in her eyes when she notices the federal marshal walking beside you. News travels fast in a small town, and by evening everyone will know that federal law enforcement has come calling. The livery stable sits at the north end of town, a large wooden building that smells of hay, horse sweat and leather oil. Sam Crane is inside, as you expected, mucking out stalls with the methodical efficiency of a man who takes pride in his work. He's a compact man, in his 40s, with arms made strong by years of handling horses and equipment. His clothes are practical: canvas pants, cotton shirt, and a leather apron that's stained with decades of honest work. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Sam calls out when he sees you. His voice is cheerful until he notices Weideman, and then his expression changes to something more cautious. "Marshal." "Sam Crane?" Weideman asks, though he already knows the answer. "That's me." Weideman produces the warrant again. "You're under arrest for theft of United States mail. You'll need to come with us." The colour drains from Sam's face like water running out of a bucket. "Mail theft? I never, Sheriff. You know me. When have I ever stolen anything?" And that's the worst part. You do know Sam, and this doesn't make sense, but federal warrants don't care about your personal opinions or local relationships. You've got two choices: enforce the warrant or find yourself on the wrong side of federal law enforcement. "I'm sorry, Sam," you say, and you genuinely mean it. "You'll need to come with us. We'll sort this out at the jail." Sam sets down his pitchfork slowly, like a man moving through deep water. "Can I at least finish with the horses? They need to be fed and watered." The horses can wait, Weidenman says. Federal business takes priority. This is where things get complicated in ways that most people don't understand about frontier law enforcement. Sam Crane isn't just a citizen. He's a businessman who employs two men and provides essential services to the community. Arresting him will leave the livery stable unattended, which means horses won't be cared for and travellers won't have a place to stable their animals. In a frontier town, disrupting essential services can have consequences that ripple through the entire community. A marshal, you say carefully. If we could just let Sam arrange for someone to cover the stable, no delays. Weidenman cuts you off. The warrant is to be served immediately. You produce your handcuffs, heavy iron things that weigh about as much as a horseshoe, and feel twice as cold. The metal is rough against your palms, and the key sticks in the lock just like everything else in this job. Sam holds out his hands without being asked, resignation written across his face, like he's already accepted whatever fate awaits him. The walk back to the jail is even worse than the walk to the stable. Word has spread and people are gathering along Main Street to watch the procession. Some faces show curiosity, others concern, and a few display the kind of anger that suggests not everyone supports federal interference in local affairs. You can hear whispered conversations as you pass, fragments of sentences that don't bode well for community relations. Federal government overreach. Sam never hurt nobody. What's next? They're going to arrest us for breathing? Back at the jail, you unlock the cell that Jake Morrison vacated this morning and gesture for Sam to enter. The cell looks even smaller and more depressing than usual, and the smell hasn't improved since your morning visit. Sam settles onto the wooden bench that serves as a bed, and for a moment he looks older than his 40-some years. "Sheriff," he says quietly, "my wife doesn't know about this. Could you... I'll stop by and let her know. You promise. It's the least you can do." Weidenman has been examining your jail with the expression of a man who's found something distasteful stuck to his shoe. "This facility doesn't meet federal standards for prisoner detention," he announces. "It's what we've got," you reply, trying to keep the irritation out of your voice. "Sam will be safe here until the circuit judge comes through. The prisoner will be transferred to the federal facility in Wichita tomorrow morning," Wiedenman informs you. "I'll be staying in town overnight to ensure the transfer goes smoothly." This means you've got to feed and guard Sam for the night, then arrange transportation to Wichita, all at county expense for a federal case. It's another one of those lovely aspects of frontier law enforcement that nobody mentions when they're pinning the badge on your chest. As evening approaches, you find yourself dealing with another challenge that's uniquely Western: gun control. Yes, despite what the movies tell you, many frontier towns had strict laws about carrying firearms within city limits. In fact, some of the most famous gunfights in Western history happened precisely because of disputes over gun control laws. Tonight's test comes in the form of 3 cowboys who rode into town about an hour before sunset. They're clearly not locals. Their horses are travel-worn, their clothes are dusty from long riding, and they have the look of men who've been living rough for weeks. More importantly, they're all wearing gun belts, which violates the municipal ordinance that prohibits carrying firearms within the town limits. The ordinance is painted on a wooden sign at each end of Main Street. By order of the mayor, no person shall carry firearms within the town limits. All weapons must be surrendered to the town marshal or county sheriff upon arrival. Fine for violation, $10 or 10 days in jail. $10 is a significant amount of money, more than most working men make in a week, but 10 days in jail is worse, especially for cowboys who are probably already behind schedule getting their herd to market. Most visitors comply with the gun law without argument, but these 3 look like they might have different ideas about municipal authority. You approach them outside Murphy's General Store, where they've tied their horses and are apparently discussing supplies. Up close, they look even rougher than they did from a distance. Their clothes are stained with trail dust and sweat, their faces are weathered by sun and wind, and their boots are caked with mud that suggests they've been riding through some challenging country. "Evening, gentlemen," you say, keeping your voice friendly but firm. "I'm Sheriff Anderson. Welcome to Dusty Creek." The tallest of the three turns to face you. He's a lean man with pale eyes and a moustache that's been stained yellow by tobacco juice. His hand rests casually on the butt of his Colt, and his stance suggests he knows how to use it. "Sheriff," he acknowledges with a nod that's more acknowledgement than respect. "I need to inform you about our municipal ordinance regarding firearms," you continue, gesturing toward the posted sign. "All weapons need to be surrendered to law enforcement while you're in town. You can reclaim them when you leave." The three cowboys exchange glances, and you can practically see them calculating odds. There's one of you and three of them. Your gun is holstered while theirs are easily accessible. From their perspective, this probably looks like a pretty good bet. "Now, Sheriff," the tall one murmurs, his voice carrying the slow drawl of someone from Texas or maybe Oklahoma, "we're just passing through, planning to buy some supplies and move on. Seems like a lot of trouble for a short visit." This is the moment that separates successful sheriffs from dead ones. You've got to enforce the law, but you've also got to stay alive long enough to enforce it again tomorrow. 3 armed men against 1 sheriff isn't great odds, especially when the nearest backup is the federal marshal, who's more concerned with his prisoner than with municipal law enforcement. Your mouth goes dry as old leather, and you can feel your heart beating faster. The late afternoon sun feels suddenly hot against your face, and your shirt sticks to your back with nervous sweat. Your hand wants to drift toward your gun, but you force it to stay still. Any sudden movement could trigger a gunfight that you're not likely to survive. "I understand you're just passing through," you say, keeping your voice steady. "But the law applies to everyone in town, visitors and residents alike. I'm sure you can appreciate that." The second cowboy, shorter and stockier than his companion, spits tobacco juice into the dirt near your feet. "What if we just finish our business real quick and ride on out? No harm, no foul." "Can't allow that," you reply, "but I can promise you'll get your weapons back in the same condition when you leave. I'll even give you a receipt." The third member of their group, a young man who can't be more than 20, looks nervous. His eyes keep darting between his companions and you, and his hand trembles slightly where it rests on his gun butt. Young men with guns and nerves make for dangerous combinations. "This is bullshit," the tall cowboy finally says. "We ain't causing trouble. We just want to buy some beans and coffee and get back on the trail." "And you can do that," you agree, "soon as you surrender your weapons." For a long moment, nobody moves. The evening air is still, except for the sound of horses shifting weight and the distant piano music drifting from salty Sues. You can smell the cowboys' unwashed bodies, mixed with horse sweat and leather and something that might be fear. Your own sweat has turned cold, and you can feel it trickling down your sides. Then, unexpectedly, salvation arrives in the form of Big Jim the blacksmith. He emerges from his shop carrying a hammer that looks like it could cave in a skull without much effort. Jim doesn't say anything. He just walks over and stands slightly behind and to the left of you, close enough to intervene if things go badly. The presence of backup changes the dynamic immediately. It's no longer 3 against 1, it's 3 against 2, and one of the two is a man who could probably bend horseshoes with his bare hands. The cowboys recalculate their odds, and apparently they don't like the new math. "All right, Sheriff," the tall cowboy says with obvious reluctance. "We'll play by your rules." One by one, they unbuckle their gun belts and hand them over. The weapons are well-maintained Colts, each worth more than most people in town make in a month. You make careful note of the serial numbers and write out receipts because losing a cowboy's gun is a good way to find yourself on the wrong end of a very personal vendetta. You can reclaim these when you're ready to leave town, you tell them. Just find me or leave word at Murphy's store. They nod and head into the general store, grumbling under their breath but complying with the law. Big Jim watches them go, then turns to you with a grin that shows several missing teeth. "Thought you might need a hand," he says. "Much obliged, Jim. Buy you a drink later? I'll hold you to that." As Jim heads back to his shop, you realize you're shaking slightly, a delayed reaction to the adrenaline that's been coursing through your system. Gun control enforcement is one of the more dangerous aspects of frontier law enforcement because it requires confronting armed men and demanding they disarm themselves. It's a job that requires equal parts courage, diplomacy, and luck. The rest of the evening passes more quietly. You check on Sam Crane, who's settled into resigned acceptance of his situation. You make your evening rounds, checking that businesses are secure and that the temporary peace is holding. The three cowboys finish their shopping and retrieve their weapons without incident, riding out of town just as the sun disappears behind the western horizon. But as you settle in for the night in your small room above Murphy's store, you can't shake the feeling that today's challenges were just a preview of worse things to come. Sam Crane's arrest has stirred up resentment against federal authority. The gun control confrontation reminded everyone that enforcing the law sometimes means risking your life. And somewhere out there, vigilante groups might be organizing to take justice into their own hands. Being a sheriff in the Wild West isn't just about keeping the peace, it's about navigating a complex web of conflicting jurisdictions, competing loyalties, and constant danger. Every decision you make has consequences that ripple through the community. Every confrontation could be your last. And every morning you wake up wondering if today will be the day your luck runs out. As you blow out your kerosene lamp and settle into your rope bed with its scratchy straw mattress, you listen to the sounds of the frontier night, wind through the gaps in the wooden walls, the distant sound of piano music from Salty Sue's, and somewhere in the darkness, the howl of a coyote that sounds almost like laughter. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new conflicts, and new opportunities to make enemies. But tonight, you're alive, you've kept the peace, and you've survived another day in one of the most dangerous jobs in America. In the world of Wild West law enforcement, that's about as much as any sheriff can hope for. 3 days later, you're awakened not by the usual morning sounds, but by frantic pounding on your door and shouting that sends ice through your veins even before you're fully conscious. The voice belongs to Tommy Fletcher, the youngest worker at the telegraph office, and he's yelling something about a stage robbery and dead men scattered along the Wichita Road. Your feet hit the cold floor running, and immediately you're reminded of just how brutal frontier mornings can be. The air in your room is so cold it burns your lungs, and your breath creates clouds that would make a locomotive jealous. Your clothes from yesterday are stiff with dried sweat and dust, but there's no time to worry about comfort when people are dying on the roads you're supposed to protect. "Sheriff!" Tommy's voice cracks with panic. "You got to come quick. Stage got hit about 10 miles out. Driver's dead, passengers scattered, and they made off with the strongbox." You're pulling on your boots while he talks, and each piece of leather feels like ice against your skin. Your gun belt settles around your waist with its familiar weight, but this morning it feels heavier than usual, like a reminder that today might be the day you actually have to use the damn thing for something more serious than intimidating drunk cowboys. "How many robbers?" you ask, grabbing your hat and the rifle that leans against the wall beside your bed. The rifle is a Winchester that's seen better years, but it's reliable and accurate enough for frontier work. More importantly, it holds more shots than your Colt, which might matter if you're facing multiple armed men. "Don't know for sure," Tommy replies, bouncing on his feet like he needs to use an outhouse. The passenger who made it back to town said maybe 4 or 5 men, all armed with rifles. They killed old Pete Collins outright when he tried to reach for his shotgun. Pete Collins. You knew Pete, a grizzled old-timer who'd been driving stages for more years than most people had been breathing. He was tough as leather and twice as smart, but even experience and caution don't mean much when you're facing armed road agents who shoot first and don't bother with questions later. This is the moment when being a sheriff stops being about collecting taxes and maintaining order and starts being about tracking down killers who won't hesitate to add another lawman to their body count. Stage robbery is a federal crime, but the nearest federal marshal is probably days away. The jurisdiction technically falls to you, and that means gathering a posse and riding out to face men who've already proven they're willing to kill. Your first stop is the telegraph office, where you send urgent messages to the county seat and to the nearest federal marshal. The telegraph operator, a nervous man named Ezra, who always smells like machine oil and coffee, taps out your messages with fingers that shake slightly. Bad news travels fast along the telegraph lines, and by noon, every lawman within 100 miles will know that the Dusty Creek Road isn't safe for travel. "Any word back yet from other counties?" you ask Ezra. "Similar robberies? Men matching these descriptions?" Ezra adjusts his wire-rimmed spectacles and shuffles through a pile of telegrams. "Nothing recent, but there was a stage hit near Abilene last month. Similar description, 4 or 5 men, well-armed, took the strong box and rode south. This suggests you're dealing with professional road agents, not opportunistic locals. Professional robbers are worse news than amateurs because they're experienced, organised, and they've probably planned escape routes and hideouts in advance. They're also more likely to kill witnesses since they understand that dead men can't identify them in court. Your next stop is finding men willing to ride with you in pursuit of armed killers. This is where the rubber meets the road in frontier law enforcement. Your authority is only as good as your ability to convince other men to risk their lives backing you up. And convincing people to chase armed robbers isn't exactly a simple sales pitch. Big Jim is your first recruit, and thankfully he agrees without much persuasion. "Can't have killers thinking our roads are easy pickings," he says, strapping on a gun belt that looks like it was built for someone his size. "I'll grab my horse and meet you at the stable." Your second recruit is more problematic. Frank Morrison, Jake's older brother and a decent shot with a rifle, agrees to join the posse but immediately starts negotiating terms. "What's the pay for posse work?" he asks. "And who covers our expenses if we're out for days?" This is one of the ugly realities of frontier law enforcement that nobody likes to discuss. Posse members are entitled to payment for their time and compensation for their expenses, but the county budget for such things is practically non-existent. You're asking men to risk their lives for minimal pay, and everyone knows it. Standard posse rate is $2 a day plus expenses, you tell Frank, though you're not entirely sure the county will actually pay that much. Food and ammunition covered if we're out overnight. Frank nods reluctantly. "I'm in, but I want that in writing." By the time you've assembled a posse, the sun is well up and you've lost precious hours that the robbers have used to put distance between themselves and pursuit. Your group consists of yourself, Big Jim, Frank Morrison, and 2 ranch hands from the Circle K who volunteered when their foreman heard about the robbery. 5 men total, probably enough to handle 4 or 5 robbers if you can catch them, but definitely not enough if they've joined up with a larger gang. The ride to the robbery site takes you through some of the most beautiful and treacherous country in Kansas. Rolling hills covered with buffalo grass stretch to the horizon, broken by rocky outcroppings and stands of cottonwood trees that follow the creek beds. It's the kind of landscape that looks peaceful and welcoming until you realize how many places it offers for armed men to hide and ambush pursuing lawmen. Your horse, a sturdy bay mare named Duchess, picks her way carefully along the rutted stage road. She's not the prettiest animal, but she's reliable and sure-footed, which matters more than speed when you're riding into potential danger. The leather of your saddle creaks with each step, and the rhythm of hoofbeats creates a steady percussion that might be soothing under different circumstances. The robbery site, when you finally reach it, looks like a scene from hell. The stagecoach sits at an odd angle, one wheel shattered and the passenger compartment riddled with bullet holes. Pete Collins lies crumpled beside the driver's seat, his body already attracting flies despite the cool morning air. Blood has soaked into the dirt around him, turning the dust into a dark, sticky mud that your boots squelch through as you examine the scene. "Jesus," whispers one of the ranch hands, a young man who's probably never seen a violent death before. His face has gone pale, and he looks like he might lose his breakfast at any moment. "Stay focused," you tell him, though your own stomach is churning. "We need to read this scene and figure out which way they went." The evidence tells a grim story. The robbers positioned themselves behind the rocky outcropping about 50 yards from the road, giving them clear fields of fire at the approaching stage. They waited until the coach was in the worst possible position, unable to turn around, with no cover for the passengers or driver. The attack was swift, brutal, and professionally executed. Bullet holes in the coach show that they used rifles, not pistols, which means they were shooting from distance rather than riding up close. That suggests discipline and planning rather than the wild, chaotic attack of desperate amateurs. The strongbox has been pried open with professional tools, not just shot apart or bashed with rocks. Most ominously, there are signs that they took time to search the passengers' belongings thoroughly. Clothes and personal items are scattered around the coach, suggesting the robbers weren't in any hurry to leave. That level of confidence is troubling. It means they either know the country well enough to be certain of escape, or they have local help. Tracks head south toward the creek, Big Jim reports, crouching beside clear hoofprints in the soft earth. 5 horses, like the witness said. They're not trying to hide their trail. That's either arrogance or another sign of professional planning. Experienced outlaws sometimes leave obvious false trails to mislead pursuit, then double back and head in a completely different direction. Following the clear trail might lead you into an ambush, but ignoring it might let the real killers escape entirely. You make the decision to follow the obvious trail, but carefully. The posse spreads out in a loose line, with each man responsible for watching a different sector. It's basic military tactics applied to law enforcement. If the robbers are waiting in ambush, at least they won't be able to kill all of you with the first volley. The trail leads through increasingly rough country, following deer paths and cattle trails that wind between stands of trees and rocky formations. Your horse's breathing becomes laboured as the terrain steepens, and sweat begins to foam on her neck and shoulders. The sun climbs higher, turning the cool morning into a warm afternoon that makes your wool coat feel like you're wearing a stove. After 2 hours of careful tracking, Frank Morrison calls a halt. "Sheriff, we got a problem." He's pointing to a spot where the trail splits into 3 different directions. The robbers have apparently divided their group, with some heading toward the river, others angling back toward the main road, and a third group disappearing into a maze of rocky hills that could hide an army. This is the nightmare scenario for pursuing lawmen, professional criminals who know how to split up and confuse pursuit. Following the wrong trail could waste precious time and let the killers escape. Following all 3 trails means dividing your already small posse into groups too small to handle armed resistance. "What do you think, Sheriff?" Big Jim asks, and you can hear the uncertainty in his voice. This is the moment when leadership matters most, when men are looking to you for decisions that could get them killed if you guess wrong. Your mouth tastes like copper pennies and your shirt is soaked with nervous sweat despite the cooling afternoon breeze. Every choice you make carries life or death consequences, not just for yourself but for the men who trusted you enough to follow you into danger. The weight of the badge on your chest feels like it might drag you right into the ground. We follow the river trail, you decide, partly based on logic and partly on gut instinct. River means water, and men who've been riding hard need water. The other trails might be false leads. It's a guess, and everyone knows it, but frontier law enforcement is full of educated guesses made with incomplete information under dangerous circumstances. Sometimes you guess right and catch the criminals, sometimes you guess wrong and they get away, and sometimes you guess wrong and end up dead. The river trail leads through a narrow canyon where the walls rise steeply on both sides and the only escape route is forward or back. It's perfect ambush country, and every man in your posse knows it. Hands rest on gun butts, eyes scan the rim rocks constantly, and everyone jumps at shadows that might or might not be armed men. "Don't like this," mutters one of the ranch hands. "Feels like we're walking into a trap." "Everything feels like a trap when you're chasing killers," you reply, trying to sound more confident than you feel. Stay alert and keep moving. The canyon floor is sandy and soft, muffling the sound of hoofbeats but preserving clear tracks that show the robbers passed this way recently. Fresh horse droppings suggest you're maybe an hour behind them, close enough to be dangerous but not close enough to see them yet. Then Big Jim raises his hand in the universal signal for silence and danger. Ahead, smoke rises from a small campfire, and through the trees you can make out the shapes of horses and men. You've found them, but now you have to figure out how to arrest armed killers without getting your posse shot to pieces in the process. The robbers have chosen their campsite well. It's in a clearing beside the river, with good fields of fire in multiple directions and escape routes that lead deeper into the hills. They're not hiding, which suggests either supreme confidence or a trap designed to lure pursuing lawmen into killing range. 5 men, like the witness said, Big Jim whispers, counting the figures moving around the camp. All armed, and they've got sentries posted. This is the moment that separates successful sheriffs from dead heroes. You could charge in with guns blazing and probably kill some of the robbers, but you'd also probably lose half your posse in the process. You could try to negotiate surrender, but men who've already committed murder rarely give up without a fight. Or you could wait for reinforcements, but every hour of delay gives the criminals more time to escape. We're going to surround them, you decide. Jim, take one of the ranch hands and circle around to block the north trail. Frank, you and the other man cover the south approach. I'll call for surrender from the front. If shooting starts, aim carefully and don't hit each other. It's a plan that might work or might get everyone killed, but it's the best option you can think of with limited men and time running out. The posse splits up, moving carefully through the trees and rocks to take their assigned positions. Every snapped twig sounds loud enough to wake the dead, and every bird call makes you wonder if it's actually a signal between the robbers. When everyone is in position, you take a deep breath and step into the clearing with your rifle ready. "County Sheriff," you call out. "You're surrounded. Throw down your weapons and surrender." For a moment, everything freezes like a painting. The robbers stop what they're doing and stare at you. Your posse members aim their weapons from concealment. Even the horses seem to sense the tension and stand perfectly still. Then one of the robbers, a bearded man wearing a brown hat, slowly reaches for his pistol, and you know the shooting is about to start. The gunfight that follows is nothing like the clean, dramatic shootouts you see in travelling shows. It's chaos, noise, and terror all mixed together in a deadly confusion that seems to last forever and end in seconds. Gunsmoke fills the clearing like fog, muzzle flashes bloom like deadly flowers, and the sound of bullets whining off rocks creates a symphony of violence that will haunt your dreams for years to come. When the smoke clears, 2 robbers are dead, 1 is wounded, and 2 have escaped into the hills. Your posse is intact but shaken. Frank Morrison has a bullet graze on his arm, and one of the ranch hands is nursing bruised ribs from diving behind a boulder. The wounded robber, a young man who can't be more than 25, is bleeding from a shoulder wound and begging for medical attention. "Please," he gasps, his face pale with blood loss and fear. "I need a doctor. I'll tell you everything. Just get me to a doctor." And that's when you realise that surviving the gunfight is only the beginning of your problems. You've got wounded men who need medical attention, dead bodies that need to be transported back to town, evidence that needs to be preserved, and prisoners who need to be guarded. All of this has to be accomplished with a tiny posse in the middle of hostile country where the escaped robbers might be planning a rescue attempt. The ride back to town takes most of the remaining daylight and tests every limit of endurance you thought you had. The wounded robber is tied to his saddle and moaning with every step his horse takes. The dead men are draped over their horses like sacks of grain, and the smell of blood and death follows your little procession like a dark cloud. By the time you reach Dusty Creek, word of the gunfight has already spread, and half the town is waiting on Main Street to see the results. Some faces show satisfaction that justice has been served. Others display concern about the violence that's come to their peaceful community. And a few show the kind of calculation that suggests they're wondering whether having a sheriff who gets into gunfights is good or bad for business. As you lock the surviving robber in your jail and begin the paperwork that will document this day's events, you realise that being a sheriff in the Wild West isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about making split-second decisions with life or death consequences, leading men into danger, and living with the results of violence that seems to follow you wherever you go. Tonight, as you finally collapse into your rope bed with its scratchy straw mattress, every muscle in your body aches from tension and exertion. Your hands shake slightly as you blow out the kerosene lamp, a delayed reaction to the adrenaline and fear that carried you through the day. Outside your window, the normal sounds of frontier night seem different somehow. Every creak and rustle might be the escaped robbers coming back for revenge, or new criminals planning fresh violence. Being a sheriff in the Wild West means never really being off duty, never really being safe, and never knowing when the next crisis will demand everything you have to give. It's a job that ages men quickly and buries them young, where success is measured not in commendations or promotions, but in simply surviving long enough to see another sunrise. 2 weeks after the stage robbery gunfight, you discover that surviving armed criminals is nothing compared to surviving frontier politics, and your education in the darker side of law enforcement begins with a late-night visit from men whose faces you can't quite see in the shadows. You're awakened not by shouting or gunfire, but by the soft scrape of boots on wooden floorboards and the unmistakable sound of someone trying very hard to be quiet. Your eyes snap open in the darkness of your small room, and immediately every nerve in your body goes on high alert. Out here, people who sneak around in the dark usually have reasons that don't bode well for sleeping sheriffs. The footsteps stop just outside your door, and you hear the low murmur of voices. At least 3 men, maybe more. Your hand moves slowly toward the Colt that hangs on the bedpost, your fingers closing around the familiar grip with the kind of careful silence that comes from knowing your life might depend on not making any noise. Then comes the knock. Soft, polite, almost gentle. But there's something about the rhythm that makes your skin crawl, like the knock of an undertaker who's come to measure you for a pine box. Sheriff Anderson? The voice is cultured, educated, with the kind of careful pronunciation that suggests someone trying to sound reasonable while discussing unreasonable things. We'd like a word, if you don't mind. You mind very much, but saying so doesn't seem like the smartest option when you're outnumbered and wearing nothing but long underwear. Just a minute, you call out, pulling on your pants and boots with movements that feel clumsy and too loud in the darkness. Your shirt sticks to your back with nervous sweat, and your hands shake slightly as you button it up. The gun belt settles around your waist like an old friend, but even armed, you feel exposed and vulnerable. 3 against 1 isn't good odds, especially when the 3 have had time to plan and position themselves while you're stumbling around in the dark trying to get dressed. You open the door to find 3 men standing in the narrow hallway, and their appearance immediately tells you this isn't a social visit. They're dressed like businessmen, clean clothes, pressed shirts, polished boots, but they wear their respectability like a disguise that doesn't quite fit. More importantly, they're all armed, and their hands rest casually near their weapons in a way that suggests they know how to use them. "Gentlemen," you say, keeping your voice steady despite the fear that's crawling up your spine like a cold snake. Little late for a social call, isn't it? The leader is a tall man with silver hair and a moustache that's been waxed to perfection. He smiles with the kind of warmth that doesn't reach his eyes, and when he speaks, his words carry the weight of money and influence. "Sheriff, I'm Thomas Blackwood, and these are my associates. We represent certain business interests in the county, and we have a proposition that might interest you." Thomas Blackwood. You've heard the name whispered in saloons and general stores. A man who owns vast tracts of land, has interests in mining operations, and supposedly has enough political connections to make or break careers with a few carefully placed words. He's the kind of man who doesn't visit sheriffs unless he wants something, and what he wants usually involves bending or breaking the law. What kind of proposition, you ask, though you already suspect you don't want to hear the answer. Blackwood's smile widens, but it still doesn't touch his eyes, the kind that could make a man's career very prosperous or very short. "May we come in?" It's phrased as a question, but the tone makes it clear that refusing isn't really an option. You step aside and let them enter your small room, which immediately feels smaller and more cramped with 4 armed men crowded into it. The air seems thicker, heavy with tension and unspoken threats. "Nice place," Blackwood observes, though his tone suggests he finds it anything but nice. "Cozy, must be challenging, living on a sheriff's salary." And there it is, the opening gambit in what you're beginning to realise is a corruption pitch. These men aren't here to congratulate you on catching stage robbers. They're here to buy you, own you, and turn you into their personal law enforcement tool. "I get by," you reply carefully. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Blackwood?" One of Blackwood's associates, a shorter man with dead eyes and scars on his knuckles, steps closer to your window and peers out into the darkness. "Nice view of Main Street from up here," he observes. "Bet you can see everything that goes on in town." The implication is clear. They know where you live, they know your routines, and they can get to you whenever they want. It's intimidation wrapped in casual conversation, and it's very effective. "Sheriff," Blackwood continues, his voice smooth as oiled leather, "we're prepared to offer you an additional monthly salary, let's say $200, in exchange for certain considerations regarding law enforcement priorities in this county." $200 a month is more than your official annual salary. It's enough money to transform your life, buy better quarters, decent food, maybe even think about a future that doesn't involve getting shot by criminals or voted out by angry citizens. It's also enough money to make you a bought man, owned by interests that probably don't have the community's best welfare at heart. What kind of considerations, you ask, though your stomach is already churning with the knowledge that you don't want to know. The third man, who hasn't spoken yet, produces a leather portfolio from inside his coat. He's a thin, nervous-looking fellow with ink-stained fingers and the pale complexion of someone who spends his time indoors working with papers and numbers. When he opens the portfolio, you can see maps, legal documents, and what appears to be a list of names. Certain mining claims in the eastern part of the county, Blackwood explains, have been filed improperly. The current claimants are operating illegally, and we need law enforcement to evict them and restore proper legal ownership. This is where sheriff corruption gets ugly and complicated. Mining claims are valuable, disputes over them are common, and the legal system is often too slow or corrupt to resolve conflicts fairly. What Blackwood is proposing sounds like claim jumping with official backing. Using your badge to steal other people's property. Who says the claims are illegal, you ask? The thin man with the portfolio speaks for the first time, his voice high and reedy like a man who's more comfortable with paperwork than people. The Territorial Land Office has irregularities in the filing dates and signatures, technical violations that nullify the original claims. Technical violations. In frontier legal systems, technicalities can be manufactured by men with enough money and influence to buy the right officials. What they're proposing isn't law enforcement, it's legalised theft with a badge attached. And if I'm not interested in your proposition, you ask, though you already know the answer will be unpleasant. Blackwood's smile disappears entirely, and suddenly the room feels colder. Sheriff, you've been in this job, 6 weeks? In that time, you've made enemies of federal law enforcement by questioning their methods, you've alienated local businessmen by enforcing gun control laws, and you've cost the county significant money pursuing stage robbers when negotiation might have been more economical. Each point hits like a physical blow because they're all true. Your job performance, viewed from certain angles, does look questionable. Federal Marshal Weidenman left town muttering about local sheriffs who don't understand proper procedure. Several businessmen have complained about the gun surrender policy affecting their customers, and the stage robbery pursuit did cost the county money for posse wages and expenses. People are already questioning whether you're the right man for this job, Blackwood continues, his voice carrying the weight of implied threats. It would be unfortunate if those questions became more vocal. The scary man by the window turns around and fixes you with a stare that makes your blood run cold. Of course, sometimes when folks ask too many questions about a sheriff's competence, they start wondering about other things too, like whether he might be taking money from criminals, or maybe even working with them road agents. It's a masterpiece of intimidation. They're simultaneously offering you money to be corrupt and threatening to accuse you of corruption if you don't take their money. It's the kind of political chess move that could destroy your career and possibly your life, regardless of what you choose. I need time to think about this, you say, hating how weak your voice sounds. Of course, Blackwood agrees, his pleasant smile returning. Take all the time you need. We'll check back in a few days for your answer. They file out of your room as quietly as they entered, leaving behind only the lingering smell of expensive tobacco and cheap cologne. You stand alone in the darkness, listening to their footsteps fade away and wondering if you've just been given an offer you can't refuse, or a death sentence with a few days' delay. The rest of the night passes without sleep. You lie on your rope bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how a simple job enforcing the law has turned into a choice between corruption and career suicide. Outside your window, Dusty Creek sleeps peacefully, unaware that their sheriff is wrestling with decisions that could determine whether justice means law and order or whoever has the most money and influence. Morning brings new problems, starting with the discovery that your prisoner, the wounded stage robber, has developed a fever that's turning his jail cell into a pestilential hole that smells like death and desperation. The bullet wound in his shoulder has gone bad, probably infected, and he's alternating between delirious rambling and periods of unconsciousness that suggest he might not survive to stand trial. Sheriff, he gasps when you check on him, his face flushed with fever and his clothes soaked with sweat. I got information, important information, but I need a doctor and I need protection. What kind of information, you ask, though you're more concerned with the smell coming from his wound. It's the sweet, sickly odour of flesh starting to rot, and it suggests that even if you could afford a doctor, it might be too late. The stage robbery, he whispers, his voice barely audible, wasn't random. Someone in town set it up. Someone who knew which coach was carrying the mining payroll. This hits you like a punch to the gut. The stage robbery that nearly got you killed wasn't just opportunistic crime. It was an inside job planned by someone with access to shipping schedules and cargo information. Someone local, someone trusted, someone who might be sitting in church on Sunday mornings while planning murders for Monday. Who, you demand, but the prisoner has slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving you with more questions and no answers. The fever breaks 2 days later, but by then your prisoner is too weak to talk coherently and too sick to be moved. He dies that afternoon, taking his secrets with him and leaving you with a dead body that needs to be buried and information that might have saved lives if you'd gotten it sooner. The funeral is a small affair. You, the preacher, and 2 men from the undertaker's establishment who handle the burial for a fee that comes out of your own pocket because the county won't pay for criminal burials. As you watch them lower the pine box into the ground, you can't help but think about all the things that man knew and all the justice that died with him. That evening, as you're making your rounds and trying to forget about dead prisoners and corruption offers, you encounter another reminder of why being a sheriff in the Wild West is more complicated than just enforcing the law. A group of local ranchers has gathered outside Murphy's General Store, and their conversation stops abruptly when they see you approaching. "Evening, Sheriff," says Ben Crawford, the foreman of the Circle K Ranch and a man whose opinion carries weight in local politics. His tone is polite but cool, and the other ranchers nod acknowledgement without much enthusiasm. "Gentlemen," you reply, noting how they've positioned themselves between you and the store entrance. It's not exactly threatening, but it's not entirely friendly either. "We've been talking," Crawford continues, "about the security situation in the county. Stage robberies, road agents, federal marshals arresting local businessmen. Folks are concerned." Here it comes, the conversation you've been dreading since Blackwood's visit. Local citizens organising to take law enforcement into their own hands, either because they don't trust official authority or because they want to control it themselves. "What kind of security measures are you considering?" you ask, though you suspect you already know. Another rancher, a grizzled man named Pete Sullivan, spits tobacco juice into the dirt and fixes you with a hard stare, the kind that gets results. Road agents don't generally survive encounters with well-armed citizens who ain't concerned about legal procedures. Vigilante justice, lynch law, summary execution without trials or legal representation. It's the dark side of frontier democracy, where popular will trumps legal process and might makes right. And once vigilante groups get organised and confident, they often decide that sheriffs who don't cooperate are part of the problem that needs solving. "I understand your concerns," you say carefully, "but vigilante action tends to create more problems than it solves. Innocent people get hurt, legal authority breaks down, and pretty soon nobody knows who's enforcing what law." Crawford nods thoughtfully, but his expression suggests he's not entirely convinced. "Maybe so, Sheriff, but when legal authority can't protect honest citizens, what choice do folks have? It's a fair question, and you don't have a good answer. Your legal authority couldn't prevent the stage robbery, couldn't save Pete Collins' life, and couldn't extract information from a dying prisoner before it was too late. From the rancher's perspective, official law enforcement is failing, and they have legitimate reasons to consider alternatives. Give me a chance to make the system work, you say, knowing how weak it sounds. I'm still learning the job, still building relationships with other law enforcement agencies. Things will improve." The ranchers exchange glances that suggest they're not entirely convinced, but Crawford nods politely. "We'll give you some more time, Sheriff. But if things don't improve soon, we may have to take steps to protect our own interests." As they disperse, you realize you're caught in a perfect storm of frontier politics. Corrupt businessmen want to buy your cooperation. Federal law enforcement questions your competence. Local citizens are organizing vigilante groups because they don't trust official authority. And somewhere in this mess, criminals are planning new crimes while you're struggling just to figure out who the good guys are supposed to be. Back in your room that night, you sit at your scarred wooden desk and try to make sense of the paperwork that's supposed to document your law enforcement activities. Incident reports, expense vouchers, tax collection records, and correspondence with county officials. All of it written by hand in your increasingly illegible scrawl. But as you work through the papers, patterns begin to emerge that make your blood run cold. The stage that was robbed was carrying mining payroll for claims in the eastern part of the county, the same area where Blackwood wants you to evict illegal claimants. The robbery happened on a schedule that suggests someone with access to shipping information provided details to the road agents, and the surviving robber's claim about inside information suddenly makes terrible sense. Someone arranged for the stage to be robbed, possibly to create financial pressure that would force the miners to abandon their claims. When that didn't work, they sent corrupt businessmen to buy a sheriff who would evict the miners legally, and if you refuse their offer, they'll probably arrange for you to have an accident or be accused of corruption yourself. It's a web of conspiracy that reaches from road agents to respected businessmen, from mining claims to county politics, and you're caught in the middle of it, expected to choose sides in a conflict where every choice seems to lead to corruption or violence. As you blow out your kerosene lamp and settle into your rope bed, you listen to the familiar sounds of frontier night and wonder how many other sheriffs have found themselves in similar situations, how many have chosen corruption over conscience, how many have died trying to stay honest, and how many have simply disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only questions and legends. Being a sheriff in the Wild West isn't just about facing armed criminals or collecting taxes from reluctant citizens, it's about navigating a moral landscape where right and wrong are often determined by whoever has the most money, the most guns, or the most political influence. It's about making choices with incomplete information and living with consequences that can destroy communities, careers, and lives. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new moral dilemmas, and new opportunities to choose between survival and principle. But tonight, in the darkness of your small room above Murphy's General Store, you're beginning to understand why so many frontier sheriffs lasted only a few months in office, and why the ones who survived were often the ones who learned to compromise with the very forces they were supposed to fight. Your decision comes 3 days later, delivered not through careful deliberation, but through the kind of violent awakening that reminds you why frontier justice moves fast and leaves little room for contemplation. You're jolted from uneasy sleep by the thunder of hoofbeats and shouting voices that cut through the pre-dawn darkness like knives through silk. Sheriff Anderson. The voice belongs to young Tommy Fletcher again, but this time he's not alone. Through your window you can see torches bobbing in the darkness and the silhouettes of mounted men gathered in the street below. Your stomach drops like a stone down a well, because midnight crowds of armed men rarely bring good news to sleeping sheriffs. You pull on your clothes with shaking hands, your fingers fumbling with buttons and buckles as adrenaline floods your system. The cold morning air bites at your skin, but it's nothing compared to the chill that runs down your spine when you realize what you're probably about to face. In Montana Territory, just last year, Sheriff Henry Plummer found himself on the wrong end of vigilante justice when citizens discovered he'd been leading a gang of road agents called the Innocents. They hanged him along with 20 other members of his criminal organization, and the story has become a cautionary tale whispered in sheriff's offices across the frontier. When you step outside, the scene that greets you looks like something from a fever dream. At least 30 men on horseback fill Main Street, their faces hidden by shadows and hat brims, their hands resting on weapons. Tall torches cast dancing light that turns familiar buildings into alien shapes and transforms neighbours into menacing strangers. The air smells of burning pitch, horse sweat, and something else, the metallic scent of fear and violence that you're learning to recognise. "Oh, Sheriff Anderson," calls out a voice from the crowd, and you recognise Ben Crawford's tone despite the formal distance in his words. "We need to talk." But this isn't talking. This is a show of force designed to make it clear that you're outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of options. The men before you represent the local power structure, ranchers, business owners, influential citizens who've decided that official law enforcement isn't serving their interests. They're not a mob in the traditional sense, but they're not exactly a friendly delegation either. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" you ask, your voice carrying better than you expected, despite the fear that's making your heart hammer against your ribs like a trapped bird. Crawford urges his horse forward a few steps, close enough that you can see his face in the torchlight. His expression is grim, determined, and completely without humour. "We know about the offer you received from Thomas Blackwood and his associates. We also know about the mining claims they want you to help them steal." The words hit you like physical blows. They know about the corruption attempt, which means either your room was watched or someone in Blackwood's organisation has loose lips. Either way, you're caught between competing forces with no safe ground to stand on. "And?" you manage to ask. Another voice emerges from the crowd. Pete Sullivan, the grizzled rancher who's never been shy about expressing his opinions. "And we're here to make sure you understand that taking Blackwood's money would be a mistake that could prove fatal to your continued health." So there it is, the choice presented in terms that couldn't be clearer. Take Blackwood's corruption money and face vigilante justice. Refuse his offer and face whatever threats he and his associates might make good on. Either way, you're caught between forces that don't particularly care whether you survive the experience. "I hadn't made any decisions about Mr. Blackwood's proposition," you say carefully. "Good," Crawford replies, "because we're about to make the decision unnecessary." That's when you notice that some of the riders are leading extra horses with bundles tied across their saddles. In the flickering torchlight, it takes you a moment to realise that the bundles are men, bound, gagged, and very much alive, judging by the struggling and muffled sounds of protest. "We found these gentlemen camped about 5 miles outside town," Crawford explains with grim satisfaction. "Had some interesting items in their possession, mining claim documents, maps of the Eastern Territory and correspondence that makes their intentions quite clear." Blackwood and his associates, the vigilantes, have taken the law into their own hands and arrested the corrupt businessmen who tried to buy your cooperation. It's frontier justice in its most direct form, citizens organising to deal with problems that official law enforcement can't or won't handle. "What are you planning to do with them?" you ask, though you suspect you already know the answer. Sullivan spits tobacco juice into the dirt with the casual accuracy of long practice. "Tree justice, Sheriff, same as what happened to Sheriff Plummer and his road agents up in Montana. Sometimes the only way to clean up corruption is to permanently remove the sources of it." Lynch law, summary execution without trial, legal representation, or due process. It's the dark side of frontier democracy, where popular will becomes judge, jury, and executioner. And while you can understand the frustration that drives men to such extremes, you also know that once vigilante groups start hanging people, they often find it easier to solve other problems the same way. "Gentlemen," you say, choosing your words carefully, "I appreciate your concern about corruption in local law enforcement, but summary execution isn't justice, it's vengeance, and once you start down that road, it's hard to find your way back to lawful behaviour." Crawford's expression hardens. "Sometimes vengeance is the only justice available, Sheriff. Legal systems that can be bought and sold don't protect honest citizens. They protect the people with enough money to buy protection." He's not wrong, and that's what makes this situation so dangerous. Corruption does make legal systems unreliable. Federal oversight is often distant and politically motivated, and local officials, including sheriffs, can be bought, intimidated, or eliminated by interests. With enough money and influence to manipulate the system, "Give me custody of the prisoners," you say, knowing it's probably futile but having to try. "Let me handle this through legal channels. If there's evidence of criminal activity, I'll see that they stand trial." The laughter that ripples through the crowd is bitter and knowing. These men have seen too much frontier politics to believe that legal channels will produce justice. They've watched corrupt officials escape consequences, seen criminals buy their way out of punishment, and observed how money and influence can twist legal systems into tools of oppression rather than protection. "Sheriff," Crawford says, with something that might be pity in his voice, "you're a good man trying to do an impossible job, but some problems can't be solved with badges and legal procedures. Sometimes you need rope and tall trees." That's when Thomas Blackwood himself speaks for the first time, his voice muffled by the gag but still carrying the authoritative tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The vigilantes have removed his gag just enough for him to speak, probably to hear any last words or confessions he might offer. "Sheriff Anderson," he calls out, his voice hoarse but still carrying that oily charm. "I can make this worth your while. These men are acting outside the law. Help me, and I'll triple my original offer." Even facing death, Blackwood is trying to buy his way out of trouble. It's almost admirable in its consistency. A man so committed to corruption that he'll attempt bribery right up until the moment they put the noose around his neck. "Triple?" Sullivan laughs. "That's $600 a month. Sheriff, you hearing this? Man thinks he can buy his way out of a necktie party." But Crawford raises his hand for silence, and his expression grows thoughtful. "Actually, Sheriff, this gives us an opportunity to demonstrate something important about justice and corruption." The vigilante leader turns to address his followers, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority that comes from genuine conviction. "This man just offered our sheriff $600 a month to betray his oath and help criminals escape justice. $600, more than most of us make in a year. Sheriff Anderson, what's your answer?" All eyes turn to you, and suddenly you understand that this isn't just about Blackwood's fate. It's a test of your character, your integrity, and your fitness to continue wearing a badge. The vigilantes want to know whether you can be bought, whether you'll choose money over justice, whether you're part of the problem or part of the solution. Your mouth is dry as desert sand, and your heart pounds so hard you're surprised everyone can't hear it. Sweat trickles down your back despite the cool morning air, and your hand shakes slightly as you consider the implications of whatever you say next. "Mr. Blackwood," you say finally, your voice carrying across the silent street, "I wouldn't take your money if you offered me the deed to half of Kansas. Corruption is exactly what's wrong with law enforcement in this territory, and I won't be part of it." The approval that rumbles through the crowd is almost palpable. These men came here prepared to hang Blackwood and his associates, but they also came prepared to judge you. Your refusal of the bribe, even under these extreme circumstances, has apparently passed their test. "Well said, Sheriff," Crawford nods. "But that still leaves us with the question of what to do with these criminals. What happens next isn't the dramatic lynching that Blackwood probably expected. Instead, it's something more complicated and more typically frontier. And a negotiated settlement that satisfies the demands of justice while avoiding the finality of summary execution. After nearly an hour of discussion, argument and debate among the vigilantes, a consensus emerges. Blackwood and his associates will be escorted to the county line and informed that returning to the territory will result in immediate hanging. Their property and assets in the county will be forfeit, distributed among the miners whose claims they tried to steal, and they'll be given exactly 1 hour to gather personal belongings before permanent exile begins. It's not legal justice in any traditional sense, but it's effective. The corrupt businessmen are removed as a threat, their victims are compensated, and the community is protected from future predation. Most importantly, no one dies, which distinguishes this vigilante action from the bloodier examples of frontier mob justice. As dawn breaks over Dusty Creek and the vigilantes disperse to their homes and businesses, you find yourself standing alone in the street, watching Thomas Blackwood and his associates ride away under armed escort. Their departure marks the end of one threat to your integrity and the community's welfare, but it also highlights the uncomfortable reality of frontier law enforcement. You couldn't have handled this situation through legal channels. The evidence against Blackwood was largely circumstantial. His political connections would have made prosecution difficult, and his financial resources could have bought legal representation that would have overwhelmed your ability to pursue justice. The vigilantes accomplished in one night what the legal system might have taken months or years to achieve, if it achieved anything at all. But vigilante justice is a double-edged sword that can cut both ways. The same community pressure that removed corrupt businessmen could easily be turned against sheriffs who make unpopular decisions, enforce unpopular laws, or simply find themselves on the wrong side of local politics. The line between justice and mob rule is often thinner than anyone wants to admit. Over the following weeks, life in Dusty Creek settles into something approaching normal, or at least what passes for normal in a frontier community where violence is always one bad decision away. The mining claims in the Eastern Territory are worked peacefully by their original claimants. Stage robberies decrease significantly, probably because the inside information source has been eliminated, and your relationship with the community improves as word spreads that you refused corruption money even when facing potential violence. But the experience has taught you uncomfortable truths about frontier law enforcement that will shape the rest of your career, however long that might be. Justice isn't always legal, law enforcement isn't always lawful, and survival often depends more on political awareness than on shooting skills or legal knowledge. You've also learned that being a sheriff in the Wild West means accepting moral ambiguity as a constant companion. You couldn't save Pete Collins from road agents, couldn't extract information from a dying prisoner, and couldn't handle corruption through legal channels. But you could refuse bribes, support your community's need for safety, and maintain enough integrity to earn the respect of honest citizens. The daily routine of sheriff's work continues with its familiar mixture of mundane tasks and life-threatening emergencies. You collect taxes from reluctant citizens, break up saloon fights, serve warrants on men who'd rather shoot than surrender, and maintain order in a community where disorder is always bubbling just beneath the surface. Some days you spend hours sweeping trash from Main Street or documenting property disputes in handwriting that grows more illegible with each passing week. Other days you ride out in pursuit of horse thieves, cattle rustlers, or armed robbers who view sheriffs as obstacles to be eliminated rather than authorities to be respected. The pay remains pathetic, $200 a year plus fees that you have to collect from people who often can't or won't pay them. Your living quarters are still cold, cramped and uncomfortable. Your equipment is still minimal and often unreliable, and your life expectancy is still considerably shorter than you'd prefer. But gradually, you begin to understand something that no one tells you when they pin the badge on your chest. Being a sheriff in the Wild West isn't really about enforcing the law. It's about helping communities create the conditions where law becomes possible. You're not just arresting criminals, you're building the social structures and relationships that make civilization viable in an uncivilized place. Every tax you collect helps fund the infrastructure that communities need to survive and grow. Every gun surrendered at the town limits demonstrates that collective safety can take precedence over individual preference. Every criminal you arrest or drive away sends the message that predatory behavior won't be tolerated, and every corrupt offer you refuse proves that integrity is possible even in systems where corruption is common. The work is dangerous, underpaid, and often thankless, but it's also essential in ways that become clear only when you understand how fragile frontier communities really are. These settlements exist in a constant balance between order and chaos, civilization and barbarism, law and violence. Sheriffs don't create that balance, but they help maintain it long enough for communities to develop the institutions and relationships that make long-term stability possible. 6 months after your confrontation with Thomas Blackwood's vigilante justice, you receive a letter from the territorial governor commending your handling of the corruption attempt. A year later, federal marshals ask for your assistance in tracking down a gang of counterfeiters, treating you as a respected colleague rather than a suspicious local official. And 2 years later, when Dusty Creek incorporates as a proper town with its own municipal government, you're elected to serve as the first official town marshal. None of this makes the job easier or safer. Horse thieves still need chasing, drunk cowboys still need calming, and corrupt officials still need resisting. But gradually, the infrastructure of civilization grows stronger, making each sheriff's task slightly less impossible than it was for their predecessors. Looking back across the years and the countless sheriffs who wore badges in frontier communities, it's clear that most of them were ordinary men trying to do an extraordinary job under impossible circumstances. Some succeeded through courage, intelligence, and luck. Others failed through corruption, incompetence, or simple misfortune. Many died young, victims of the violence that made their profession necessary. But collectively, they created something remarkable, the foundation for legal systems that could evolve from frontier justice to modern law enforcement. They established precedents for community policing, demonstrated that law enforcement could serve citizens rather than just powerful interests, and proved that integrity was possible even in systems where corruption was common. The Wild West era of American history lasted only a few decades, from roughly 1835 to 1895. But during that brief period, thousands of sheriffs, marshals, and local lawmen helped transform a lawless frontier into communities where families could raise children, businesses could operate safely, and individuals could pursue opportunities without constant fear of violence or predation. Most of these men are forgotten now, their names known only to local historians and genealogists, but their collective contribution to American civilization is immeasurable. They took jobs that nobody wanted, faced dangers that nobody should have to face, and accepted responsibilities that seemed impossible to fulfill. And somehow, despite inadequate pay, minimal equipment, and constant threats to their safety, enough of them succeeded often enough to make the difference between chaos and civilization. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep in your own comfortable bed, in your own safe home, protected by legal systems that work imperfectly but persistently, remember the men who wore badges when wearing them meant risking everything for the possibility that someday, somewhere, justice might become more than just a word painted on courthouse walls. The sheriffs of the Wild West weren't heroes in the Hollywood sense. They were ordinary people doing an extraordinary job under impossible circumstances, but their willingness to try, despite the odds and dangers, helped create the foundation for the world we live in today. In a very real sense, every peaceful night's sleep we enjoy is a testament to their courage, their stubbornness, and their refusal to let the frontier stay wild forever. So sleep well, knowing that the long journey from frontier justice to modern law enforcement was built on the sacrifices of men who answered the call to serve, even when answering meant facing down armed criminals with nothing but a badge, a gun, and the hope that civilization was worth fighting for. Their legacy lives on in every police officer who chooses service over safety, every sheriff who protects the powerless, and every citizen who believes that justice is possible even in an imperfect world. The The Wild West is gone now, tamed by sheriffs who lasted long enough to see it become something better. But the courage they showed, the integrity they maintained, and the hope they carried forward remains as relevant today as it was in the dusty streets of frontier towns where the law was whatever good men were willing to fight for.